The American macro machine, Greg IdrA Fields, spawning in on Steps of War here, which I'm sure you've heard me reference Steps of War on the channel. Steps of War is the shortest, smallest map in StarCraft II history. It's a clusterphobic, rush-centric map that is just wretched for Zerg. If we think about how the races work on a core level in StarCraft, both 1 and 2, Zerg is unique because all their stuff comes from the hatchery, and if they make attacking units instead of drones, then that means they fall behind. Terran and Protoss can sit there and pump workers from their main buildings the entire time because their attacking units come from the other buildings. Since all of the units come from the Zerg hatchery, they have to make a choice. Do I want to make attacking units or drones? If they make attacking units for no reason, they fall behind. So this is the era of StarCraft II that we're in. You can still make barracks before supply depot. The bunker salvages for 100%, meaning that not only are bunker rushes easier to pull off in the sense that the bunker builds faster, the rush distance is shorter, you're not going to have to proxy your barracks. Watch the rush distance time from natural to natural here. It's just like a handful of seconds. There are all these elements that go into Zerg being worse and more flimsy in the early game. The Queen is worse for Zerg. There is no Ravager. It's a very, very difficult time to be Zerg. From the moment the StarCraft II Wings of Liberty beta comes out in March of 2010 to about May of 2012, Zerg is the worst race. And specifically for the beginning of the beta time, which is what we're watching now, this is like later in the beta slash, this isn't at the very beginning of the beta, but it's still in that super early era. In this super early era, it was so brutal to be Zerg in the sense that the windup of the game was way slower, and a player like IdrA is a hard-committed macro player, and he knows that he's probably going to be rushed on the slow ground as he sees his drone dies, and 2 Marines are going to surge up here into his natural as a bunker gets started. And if you've been a fan of the channel for a long time, you might remember this looks a lot like one of the most famous and impactful games IdrA ever played, where he played the Korean Terran MVP as the push is pushed away there at the peak of his powers on this map, and MVP went for that build. And remember, part of what makes Zerg flimsy in this era is there is nothing at the base of the ramp. There's no neutral depot, there's no unbuildable terrain, so Terran can just walk up and double bunker block you in your base, and at that point the game is over. What are you gonna do, Baneling bust out of your own main after you've been stuck on one base versus 2 for like 3 minutes? No Ravager, so you can't bile it down. The Queen has 3 range. If you got blocked in your base, it was over. And it was sort of figured out very early on that was sort of like a really easy way to just like knock the Zerg out of this game with a sucker punch blow. But ultimately it was sort of like, oh yeah, it's just imbalanced, and the map makers adjusted. Took Blizzard forever and a day to figure that one out, even after the entire scene knew and people were losing undeserved tournament games because of it. Blizzard was still screwing it up. IdrA defends the light little pressure there. One of the funny things that IdrA would always talk about was basically like, okay, yeah, I beat this person, but he made all these obvious mistakes. What happens when I face like a decent player who doesn't make these style of mistakes? See his series versus MVP, and hilariously, he's going to get a Ling in. That's one of those things where even though IdrA got bad luck there and he lost and MVP was great, he got bad luck in the sense that he got like all the bad spawns and had to play on the terrible maps. If you were Zerg in this era, you had to play, let's say there was a best of 7. Steps of War was in the map pool. That's considered an auto loss for Zerg, as you see 2-port Banshee coming in here. But what's really crazy that you have to consider is that it was like, okay, I lost Steps of War, but I get to play Metalopolis. Well, now Metalopolis is close positions, because you could spawn in at any of the 3 positions, including close by ground, and IdrA once quipped that close by ground Metalopolis is actually worse than Steps of War, because the rush distance is just as short, but the terrain is worse, which was of course true. The thing about this era that was brutal is that not only was it more difficult to scout a Zerg and the windup was longer, you had way less defensive options overall. You look at the game now, you just make a bunch of queens. It's going to defend you against nearly everything. In this era, the queen wasn't even good. You had to have a Evo chamber to make spores. We can see IdrA running off of creep a little bit, and this is one of those things that compounds. The queen is way worse, thus you don't want to make extra of them, okay? The wind-up is slower and it's more cutthroat, thus you have to cut more corners. Because you don't want to make that extra queen, you don't have the creep tumor connecting your bases. You need to get lair out earlier to rush out Spire because you don't have a Ravager and you don't have an effective defensive queen to deal with this stuff. So Zerg was way more flimsy in this era, and we'll see if IdrA might just get walked over by this 2-port Banshee. In this really brutal, grotesque era where it was just so difficult to play macro Zerg, you also have the trouble of, well, yeah, you have to account for these Marine Rush builds and 100% salvage bunker and then the Hellion follow-up, and oh, we also could be macroing. And there was also this little element that was almost like a little asterisk, like, by the way, he could also go Banshee. It was one of these things that in many ways, because your scouting was highly limited, you almost had to just write off. It was like, well, my build prepares me for like this and this, but it does not account for Banshee at all. They don't even have an Evo. It's one of those things. Like, there's no world in which on Steps of War you can prepare for like 5 racks Reaper and 3 racks Marine and a tank push. Like, you see what I'm saying? Because the responses are completely different, and because the Queen was just so wretched defensively, we can see it just gets walked down there. The Banshee basically walks the first Queen down before it can react, and because the rush distance is so short, these attacks have been occurring extremely rapidly, one right after the other. IdrA squeezing out only a couple mutas. Remember, this is such a low econ, cutthroat sort of game where you're just barely even able to get your natural up. You have to rush to get the Spire up. That's why he only had the 2 queens. Nobody insta-started the other once the other one died. And the mutas are going to try to stave off the harassing force here for the Terran player. The Terran running in with Banshee, running in with Hellions. Remember, the Banshees will have Cloak soon. So IdrA's in a position where he wants to counterattack, but he is sort of telling himself, I have to walk across the map and get counter damage. I don't want to play a long macro game on Steps of War. And since this is a heavy committed 1-base 2-port Banshee build, you're not going stem. And have you ever deserved to win a game? That is such a good quote from Greg. And this is really sort of the idea and how it felt to play at the time for a top-end macro player like IdrA, who just came from being the best non-Korean in Brood War by a mile, playing macro Terran, which was the hardest thing in Brood War by a mile. And then for whatever reason, you listen to Dan Artosis when he says, hey, we should play Zerg instead of Terran. They stuck it out with Terran all those years in Brood War when it was so insanely hard. And then when StarCraft 2 first came out and then the Wings of Liberty beta, Terran was the easiest and best race. Sort of amusing to think, like, what if IdrA and Artosis had stuck to Terran at least for like the first 2 years? I've actually asked Artosis about this, and Artosis said, like, yeah, I've laughed about this with IdrA, and I told him that it was probably, and we came to the conclusion, probably actually a good thing, even though it was harder for you as a pro, because it sort of helps you get known, because he was like definitively the best Zerg at the time, especially for non-Koreans, and it really helped him get noticed in more streams. It's like, oh, he's like the Zerg guy, and he has the smart aleck wit. Oh yeah, let's tune into him. IdrA picking off the turrets in terms of the SCVs, building them. One thing IdrA always loved to do in the Wings of Liberty era, because it was like way more low econ and you had to like fight and claw and scratch a bit more, he would pick off building SCVs or get stuff burning and run away, sort of in deference to like, well, I know I can't kill the building, but I'm gonna get it burning, I'm gonna pick off the worker. And if we think about like harass in general and how it's developed, yeah, that's still good. Oh, I'm gonna pick off the building SCV, but that's not something that we see as much. It's more of like Terran surges into the mid game, they can have their turret. It's like so much more mapped out and formulaic. This feels a little bit more like Brood War, where the Zerg is like knifing in and trying to get damage done and trying to see if they can pick off the weak spots. And the Terran here is trying to go into bio. Again, it's the beta. He doesn't really know what the hell he's doing. He's made Mass Viking, and he went ahead and went double Raven because he had Tech Lab on each starport, so why not? And he throws out the auto turret there, which IdrA turns around and snipes. This truly is a beta game in every sense of the word, and we can see on the bottom of our screen the reactor is burning down. And IdrA running in, sniping that reactor that was burning. Remember, you can like queue up, you can tell your mutas like attack this and then run away after you kill it. Like you can right click the thing and then hold shift and right click. But if you do that and look away and they go to defend, you can lose all your mutas doing that. So what IdrA is doing is more precise. That's like his standard micro that he'll do consistently, but then he'll sort of like follow up in micro as it's going on, and then a lot of times run away once it gets burning, and then inject, and then go back to muta micro. The Terran player has pushed across the map here for a counter. See, in Brood War, you would just have a couple lurkers here, and this would never work. Lurkers not around in Wings of Liberty. So now, despite basically outplaying this guy the whole game, IdrA's in a situation where he's fighting for his life desperately against auto turrets, and the mutas start to get popped and blistered. And we might be seeing a witty rejoinder here from IdrA, as because this is Steps of War, the Terran just cheesy trash. Love that one. And Moose says, lol, and he really was, like, bunker rush, 2-port Banshee, and then IdrA says, fuck you newbie, which is great, before he leaves, classic Greg. But ultimately, when we think about this game, it's a lesson in the rush distance, because look, IdrA is harassing here with his mutas, okay, it's 15-40 in the game, the Terran's dead, like basically. And because the econ is how it is, IdrA's harassing, and it literally is 15 seconds, and the Terran has made it from his main to the Zerg's natural. Even if IdrA saw the move out occur and used all of his larvae to make stuff, it wouldn't have been enough. Think about, like, if you're always at a disadvantage and always on the back foot, it makes it where you can't simultaneously then always prepare for, like, the other thing. In other words, if IdrA can't even make enough mutas to kill one turret and snowball his harassment lead, how on earth is he going to also, like, on 2-base Steps of War, squeeze out Lings and Banes? Oh, and also, like, when are you going to do that? Because the Terran can literally just A-move you at any time and be there. So, lesson in Steps of War and a lesson in 2-port. This is the sort of stuff that existed in the beta. Easy.